Hola, buenos días. Voy a compartir mi historia de mi aneurisma cerebral que me detectaron en Venezuela el 19 de marzo del 2019. Yo fui al médico como una consulta normal a hacerme unos exámenes porque tenía muchos dolores de cabeza. Fui, me hice los exámenes, me mandaron a hacer una resonancia magnética. Fui al centro de la resonancia, me hicieron una resonancia magnética y observaron allí algo no común que me dijo el médico. Después de allí me mandaron a hacer una resonancia magnética con contraste y fue donde observaron que yo tenía un aneurisma cerebral microcraniano con muchas complicaciones, me dijo el médico en ese momento. Yo fui a consulta con él, me decían que eso no tenía cura porque eso estaba demasiado avanzado, estaba muy comprometida la vena de galeno y muchas venas más. Entonces yo era una persona normal, fue en 2019 que me explotó esos dolores de cabeza y esa situación. Y fui a varias consultas, busqué varias opiniones médicas, muchos médicos cirujanos, neurocirujanos, y todos me decían lo mismo, que no había cura para esa aneurisma. Mandamos exámenes, el médico que me veía a mí en Venezuela mandó exámenes para Houston, aquí en Estados Unidos, y mandaron esos exámenes para España. Y allá los médicos que observaron eso decían que eso era muy complicado operar eso, entonces que era mejor que yo me quedara tranquilo y esperara mi muerte en mi casa, pues porque no había cura para eso. Eso fue en 2019. Yo seguí bebiendo mis pastillas que me mandaron para los dolores de cabeza, haciendo el tratamiento que me dijo el médico. Pero los dolores de cabeza ya eran demasiado fuertes, me daba mareo, vomitaba y no podía aguantar los dolores de cabeza y me daba desmayo. Yo no perdía conocimiento nunca, pero me sentía débil. Eso fue 2019, 2020 fue la cuestión empeorando. Los ojos, yo antes era achinadito y los ojos por esa aneurisma se me brotaron hacia afuera. Siempre vivía con los ojos rojos, como si tuviera sangre en los ojos. Y 2020, 2021, la cuestión fue empeorando más, pero yo seguí mi vida tranquilo. Bueno, en el 2020, a finales del 2020, yo dejé de beber ese poco de tratamiento que me mandaron y yo me resigné. Yo dije, bueno, yo no voy a seguir bebiendo más medicamentos, voy a seguir mi vida normal sin prestar atención a lo que yo tengo, pues porque ya me dicen que no tengo cura y voy a esperar que eso reviente cuando Dios quiera. En el 2022 tomamos la decisión de venirnos para acá, para Estados Unidos, para darle una mejor vida a mis hijas, porque tengo dos niñas pequeñas de 14 años y 16 años, perdón. Entonces nos vinimos para acá y yo seguí, apenas llegué aquí, llegué trabajando, haciendo mis cosas como siempre. Y en febrero de 2022, de febrero 2023, yo convulsioné, me llevaron al hospital Centra, ahí me vio un médico, no recuerdo el nombre de él, me vio el médico, me dice que me hicieran una resonancia. Fui a la UBA, ahí me atendió un médico especialista en eso y me mandó a hacerme unos exámenes y una cuestión. Entonces yo le dije a mi esposa, mira, vamos a hacerme esos exámenes. Como sabíamos que ya eso no tenía cura, entonces yo le dije a mi esposa, no, vamos quedando tranquilos en la casa, no vamos a ir a hacernos nada y vamos a seguir para adelante en nombre de Dios. Y bueno, seguí trabajando. Después me da un fuerte dolor de cabeza. En el mismo febrero me da un fuerte dolor de cabeza y voy al oftalmólogo. Ahí me hacen el chequeo de la vista y el doctor dice, no, tienes que ir de urgencia al hospital porque tienes algo muy malo ahí. Y ese dolor de cabeza que me dio tan fuerte, yo quedé viendo triple. Veía 3 personas, yo, bueno, mareado y eso, fui al médico y ahí fue donde el doctor Elakkad me atendió y me dice, Rubén, tienes un aneurisma bastante complicado y la solución es esta, operarte. Entonces yo le digo, ok, doctor, dígame los riesgos. Entonces me dice que es una aneurisma demasiado avanzada y que los riesgos de vida son pocos porque estaba muy fuerte. Entonces yo le dije, bueno, doctor, en nombre de Dios, vamos a operarnos. Mi familia no quería que yo me operara. Y bueno, me operé, gracias a Dios. La primera operación salió bien y duré como 7 días en el hospital, en la recuperación, las terapias, y el médico me dio de alta y me iban a hacer una segunda aneurisma, angiograma. Me hicieron el angiograma y después me tuvieron que volver a operar porque seguía todavía la aneurisma, porque cerraron varios venas que curaron allí, pero todavía quedaron otras por hacerle. Fuimos a la segunda operación, gracias a Dios, todo bien. Y tuve una tercera operación y estoy excelente, ya no tengo dolores de cabeza, no tengo mareo, gracias a Dios no he convulsionado más. Y tengo mi vida, gracias a Dios, al hospital central que me apoyó el doctor Elakkad, agradecido eternamente con él. Bueno, y de aquí, bueno, aquí estamos bien. En estos días tengo otro angiograma que me van a hacer, una resonancia, pero es una resonancia magnética con contraste, que Dios mediante, bueno, me den de alta definitivo, que no tengo más operación, pero yo estoy excelente, excelente, duermo lo que antes no dormía, porque yo ya ni dormía con esos dolores de cabeza y esos mareos, pero estoy bien, gracias a Dios, y al hospital que me apoyaron. Muchas gracias.
I remember when I first got consulted about Ruben's case from the neurology service, they told me, "Oh, we see some abnormalities on the MRI after a seizure episode." When I looked at the MRI, I was very surprised. There was a lot of abnormally dilated vessels, tortuous abnormal vessels, pathologic vessels sitting in his brain, and even going to his eye. A lot of engorged veins that we can see on the scalp, on the brain itself. His face and his head and neck region in general was so much puffed. So there was a lot of congestion, swelling. There was a lot of puffiness. You can see on his face a lot of dilated vessels in his scalp. You can see that his eyes even were so red. So I remember when I returned back to the neurologist who consulted me, I told him, okay, so it's more than just abnormal findings. I remember also the first day when I saw Ruben in the hospital, and I tried to dig more into the details as when exactly he was diagnosed with these a lot of pathologic vessels and a dural fistula. He told me that was well known. I was told that he was diagnosed years and years ago while he was in Venezuela. This is his home country. And he was told that this is untreatable lesion. So story started years and years ago when he had seizures, sensory deficits, abnormal sensation, when he had abnormal vision, double vision. We started with a diagnostic cerebral angiogram. Well, a diagnostic cerebral angiogram basically is a minimally invasive procedure where we go through the arteries, either from the wrist or from the groin, and we go all the way with a catheter all the way up to the lower neck vessels, inject the dye, take the pictures by the x-ray. And we did that when he was in a hospital. And again, no surprise, since I saw the MRI previously, there was tons of abnormally dilated and tortuous vessels in his brain. So basically the diagnosis was a dural arteriovenous fistula. I will break it down a little bit. What we mean when we say arteriovenous fistula, it's basically, so the normal pathway, I usually start with the normal pathway. Arteries feeding a tissue in between, in his case, it will be brain tissue, and draining into a vein. When we have a direct connection between arteries and veins, that's the so-called arteriovenous fistula. That's basically it. In his case, it was so complicated because he had a very special kind of the dural arteriovenous fistula called vein of Galen region. All these arterial feeders were directly connecting to that vein. So what was the size of this vein? The size of this vein was like the baseball size, a tennis ball size in his brain, sitting in his brain. When we did a cerebral angiogram for him, there was multiple points, multiple arteriovenous fistula points. Okay, so it was not only draining into the vein of Galen, but also there were multiple arterial feeders shunting directly into other veins. So that also adds to the complexity of his case. There are multiple scoring systems for the dural arteriovenous fistula. I personally use Coinard classification system because it's more detailed. And in all scoring systems, Ruben scored the highest grade in all scoring systems. So in addition to what he presented with, seizures, double vision, sensation deficits, or sensory abnormalities, weakness, and all that stuff, the dural arteriovenous fistula in itself is a high risk of bleeding. So that will be, and we can imagine that this is sitting in his brain, that will be a major bleed. We did as a diagnostic cerebral angiogram, we understood the hemodynamics, and what is feeding what is shunting into what, and we studied the hemodynamics of his brain, and then we set him up for the treatment. Well, the treatment was a little bit tricky because such a very high flow fistula or malformation in a brain that was probably sitting in his brain for several years, treating in only one session will not be a wise thing. So we told him ahead of it that we are going to treat in different sessions, and our aim was to slow down the fistula. We never aimed for complete treatment of his fistula because it was so diffuse and so complicated. It's worth mentioning here that this malformation, although it was primarily sitting in his brain, it did not only affect his brain, but also it affected his spinal cord as well. So his spinal cord was so much congested to the extent that we did the MRI and it revealed the spinal vascular myelopathy. So the spinal cord was also edematous and congested. Anyways, we set him for treatment. The first treatment session, we took out about 60% of the fistula. We slowed it so much down, and we were able to. So again, it will be the same thing. We went through with the catheter from the groin all the way up to the brain vessels or the abnormally dilated vessels to the arterial feeders, and we with the microcatheters under X-ray we were able to take down the venous pouch, which represents the connection between the arteries and the veins. So once you take them down, you pretty much treated the fistula. So in this case, in the first session, we were able to slow down the fistula down to about 60%. And then we set up for the second session, we treated a bunch of arterial feeders using glue, And on the third session, we completed the treatment. As for the procedure itself, I would reiterate that it's a minimally invasive procedure. We go through the arteries, so it's a very, very small, at the end of the day, it's a very small hole in one of the arteries. I usually go from the groin, and then we go all the way up with the catheter, all the way up with the microcatheters, very small microcatheters, to where the arteriovenous shunt is, and try to treat this fistula. We have several embolizing materials using coils, and some use NBCA glue. It's basically glue to cast the vessels down. So in the first and the second, third sessions, we did this micro-invasive or minimally invasive microsurgery, not with an open brain surgery, and we were able to treat it all. So on the third and the final session, we were able to treat this fistula all, and I was very fascinated with the result. And as I always told Ruben, if I have to be optimistic on his case, I would say that we will be able to slow it down to an extent that dramatically improve his lifestyle, not to reach total obliteration result.